Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, Nebraska position rankings heading into 2024. And Dale, kind of doing this practice, I think two things really jumped out. One, I think every single position group on this Nebraska roster gets better heading into 2024, which I don't think a lot of teams across the country can say. You look at the work Nebraska did in the transfer portal, incoming freshmen, and then just the sheer amount of experience that they bring back heading into 2024. There's not a position group that I think takes a step back heading into the fall. And I think the second thing that kind of jumped out to me, this is an awfully complete roster. I mean, you take a look at these position groups. This was one of the more difficult programs to rank these position groups because they're all pretty damn solid heading into 2024. A lot of reason to believe this Nebraska team gets a lot better in the 2024 year. Fired up to get into our rankings. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Nebraska fans. Y'all know we have a blast talking this program. You guys consistently show a ton of support to the boys. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, ton of different ways you could go about stacking these position groups. Would love to hear some input, some feedback from you guys in the comments section. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into, at least in my mind, I think this is the obvious choice, the best position group for this Nebraska program. It's on the defensive line. Starts with Ty Robinson and Nash. I don't know how many interior defensive lineman duos that you're taking over these two heading into the 2024 year, but I think what entices me the most about this Nebraska defensive line is you got, some big time upside in terms of young talent, right? Prince Will U, Cam Lenhart, two guys that, played some really solid football as freshmen, but going into year two, you expect to kind of take that jump. I would throw in Jamari Butler as another very quality player for Nebraska on the defensive line, at least in my mind, the best position group in the country heading into 2024.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised here you say obvious. And I think there's a top two, frankly. I think it's secondary. I think it's D-line. I have secondary one. I think a big part of it is I think it's a more complete unit top to bottom. And you're right. The two guys on the inside, they're dominant. We know what they are. But I do think there's some wood to chop on that edge play. I think they need to be better in pass rush with their front four. I think their edge rushers need to play a lot better. And again, I think there's reasons to believe it. Obviously, Prince Will U looks like he can be a premier edge rusher. I just think right now I come into the secondary room, I see no questions. I think they adding a little bit of depth with Sayer Wright is probably really helpful because that was the one thing you look at. Like, it is a thin room in a sense, but top to bottom, this is the most complete unit on this team, I think.
So I understand the criticism of the edge rusher position for Nebraska. They were very reliant on whether it was the interior defensive line or sending pressure from your linebackers and safeties to get home on the quarterback. I guess it is a little bit of projection in my standpoint, right? Like, I think Prince Will U, Cam Lenhart do take those steps as premier edge rushers for Nebraska. I'd even throw in a guy like James Williams, who I thought played some really good football for Nebraska. I'm kind of betting on some development from the edge rushers for this Nebraska program. And Dill, you're probably right. I have secondary coming in as the number two position group. I think my only question is a little bit thin at the cornerback spot, right? With Ethan Nation not with the program right now, Bly Hill struggling with some injuries. You suddenly have some question marks about the depth specifically in the cornerback room. Now, you mentioned Sayer Wright, massive addition, not only like just some really good depth, a guy that's played a lot of football in the Pac-12, seeing a lot of really good passing attacks, quarterbacks, wide receivers, but he's got some high upside. There was a reason this kid was a top 100 national recruit coming out of high school and at times played that way. So I can understand why you are high in the secondary. I think maybe the best player on this team, Isaac Gifford, is probably a guy that you really like heading into 2024. You're probably right?
Defense. You have some positional versatility as well. You have a guy like Malcolm Hartzog, who I think can play safety, corner, nickelback. I think he can do all three. So I think you have enough positional versatility. You have really good group of safeties. And again, obviously, Sayer Wright that's a big addition because obviously you go in, you pretty much might only have two guys who can really play that cornerback room, assuming Bly Hill maybe takes a couple weeks to get rolling in the season. but I think they were able to make that move. And I just think, look, it's a very, very complete unit.
Yeah, and another guy I would shout out is Jeremiah Charles. You talk about some upside. You talk about what it might look like in terms of development. You also move Jaden Doss over, so there are some names that are kind of fascinating that could step up in the cornerback room. Dill, going to number 3, this was probably one of, if not the worst position groups on Nebraska in 2023. You talk about why we're kind of high on this team heading into 2024. The pass catcher room is massively better for this Nebraska program. And at least my mind, one of the more talented position groups heading into 2024. You look at Jamal Banks, one of the best receivers in the ACC coming to Nebraska, that true wide receiver one that Nebraska just did not have in 2023. You're bringing Isaiah Nahor, who is a couple of years removed from being one of the more dynamic deep threats that we saw in college football. And then you start sprinkling in the young talent, like whether it's Jalen Lloyd, Malachi Coleman, true freshman Ja'Cory Barney Jr., there's some young upside that comes along with the veterans that you brought in through the transfer portal. Thomas Fidone going into his second year, finally healthy. I look at the pass catch room and say this might be one of the more improved position groups that we see across the country heading into 2024.
No disagreements about the steps it took. I had offensive line number 3 personally, and I think a lot of it, frankly, is that continuity you kind of look for, and also the development they took from year 1 to year 2 under Matt Rhule. I thought when he or his year taking over that team, that was the unit that I looked at. Okay, they're playing the right way. And Scott Frost, he obviously could never get anything out of that unit. They constantly struggled. Matt Rhule, with ostensibly the same players, makes that offensive line a very competitive unit. And I think you go ahead, Micah Mazekua in the transfer portal, really, really good, plays the physical style that I think Nebraska wants to play. I think, frankly, a lot of it hinges on Teddy Prohaska. If you believe he can be a very consistent player, I think this can be one of the better offensive lines in the conference. If he struggles again and can't get that consistency going, yeah, that's probably the hinge in terms of what this offensive line can be. But if you believe in the development, which is one thing I thought of all the positions, I thought their offensive line took the biggest steps. I think that combined with continuity, I think this offensive line's
and I had him at 6, but again, that was kind of the fascinating part about stacking these position groups is they're kind of bunched up. This is a very complete roster. There's no obvious really question marks on this team, obviously, besides the quarterback spot, which we'll talk about. One of the things I love that you mentioned, and something that I want to highlight, is continuity. You look at so many programs across the country, it's a revolving door on the offensive line in the transfer portal. Nebraska went out and got Big Micah in the portal as their only addition, and this is just a veteran player that's played a lot of football, whether it was in the Big 12 or the SEC, but then the rest of the guys you look at have played a lot of football together during the 2023 year, and like you noted, massive improvements from the Nebraska offensive line that you saw week 1 to what you saw week 12. If you kind of buy into the improvements you saw and say, hey, what's a full offseason look like with this unit, you could be looking at a very solid offensive line for Nebraska in the 2024 year. Going to my number 4 position group, Dill, let's talk about the running back room, which kind of just turned into a disaster for Nebraska in 2023. Obviously, Anthony Grant struggling to hold on to the football. Gabe Ervin Jr. and Ramir Johnson go down early, and you were forced to give Emmett Johnson a ton of carries as a guy that didn't have a ton of experience, was probably running with the scout team during fall camp, and then was thrusted into that running back 1 rotation. I think the biggest difference that I see with this running back room, it is really, really deep, right? Gabe Ervin Jr., Ramir Johnson coming back from injury. You have Emmett Johnson coming back. You go out and bring Dante Dowdle, a very coveted kid from high school from the Oregon Ducks. You had one really reliable running back in the 2023 season with Emmett Johnson because Anthony Grant couldn't hold on to the football. Now you got 4 running backs that all do some different things. I think this running back room has some big-time upside, but it is massively improved from what you saw in 2023.
And I frankly think you hope Dowdle can kind of build into that number 1 guy and add a little bit more explosive playmaking, because that was the one thing. And you like what Gabe Ervin brings him. I mean, that big physical style he runs with, I really do like that part of his game, but I think you'd probably like to see them hit a couple more bigger chunk plays. And I think Dante Dowdle has a little different gear maybe than Gabe Ervin. So again, I think that adds a lot to this. I'm with you. I don't have any arguments with her. You slap this running back play. I think if they get true elite number one play from Dowdle or Irvin, I think you see this room up higher. Maybe we might be sleeping on it a bit, but I do think there's an element you got to prove one of these guys is like the real deal.
Gabe Irvin Jr., if he stays healthy, like I am fascinated by him. And I think he fits exactly how Nebraska, Matt Rhule wants to run the football. We haven't really gotten to see him throughout his Nebraska career consistently. He's the guy that I have circled in this running back room. And I think one more thing to kind of highlight is the versatility, the amount of different style of running backs, which is something that college programs are moving towards and NFL teams. And you look at, hey, we want a running back that can operate between the tackles. We want a running back that can be a pass catcher, that can hold up in pass pro. That's what I see in this Nebraska running back room heading into the fall. Number 5, Dill, the linebacker room. And it's no secret, the boys, the Nebraska fans who've been rocking with the fellas the last couple months know we've been banging the table for Javin Wright. There is some big-time upside in terms of what Javin Wright can be as an off-ball linebacker. I think one of the questions I look at and why they kind of have him slotted in at number 5 is depth concerns. Maybe you're bringing Stephon Thompson. We're not necessarily sure if he's going to play off-ball or come off the edge. We like John Bullock. We like Mackay. But outside of that, I don't know who's the linebacker 4 or 5 for this Nebraska program. That's why I have them a little bit lower than some other position groups, but another room that could be very solid for Nebraska in the 2024 year.
And I think in addition to the depth, I think you need to see somebody be that guy, if you will, or someone play really at a high level, because I don't think you've seen great play from the Nebraska linebackers. I think it was a lot better last year than it was the years before. I thought their two guys took steps, Heinrich and I'm blanking on the Reimer.
Reimer,
he played good ball last year compared to the year before, but they weren't giving you like really dynamic, elite sideline to sideline play. And I think that's kind of what you're looking for, Javin Wright, because he does have the athletic profile to give you ultra high level play, not just like pretty solid.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Reimer, Heinrich, those guys were phenomenal linebackers for Nebraska for a very long time. But you're right. I think there's a reason they weren't in the top 150 NFL draft picks. I don't think they were the premier kind of linebackers that you're looking for, especially in this modern era of the Big Ten where you have Oregon, you have USC, Washington, UCLA, teams that are going to make you operate in space a little bit more. I look at Javin Wright and say much better fit in terms of what you're looking for at the off-ball linebacker spot in this modern era of the Big Ten where there's going to be a lot of speed and space. Last position group we got to talk about. And this is not us necessarily saying the quarterback play is going to be bad. I just don't know if you can put him any higher than last right now because of the uncertainty. It's the quarterback room. It's no secret. It was a problem in 2023. We're both believers in Dylan Rhule for a couple of different reasons, right? One, the arm talent. It's special. Number 2, you kind of trust the it factor, and just this kid was born with a football in his hand to play quarterback. And so if there's any guy that was a freshman in that 2024 class that I look at and say, I'm comfortable with that kid starting year 1 as a college football player, the answer was probably Dylan Rhule. And so you look at this quarterback room, you can't put him as the best position group on this team right now. We fast forward to the middle of October, it could be a top 3 position group on this Nebraska team. But right now, early July, you have to have him here.
Yeah, I almost think you can't really rank because at the end of the day, you don't know Dylan Rhule. Again, it was so bad last year. It's going to get better. I almost like by hook or by crook, someone's going to make this work because it can't be worse than last year. But I do think like how can you put them over units that, again, as you kind of said, every unit has some guys who you're pretty comfortable with. I don't think there's like gaping holes in this Nebraska team that you're like, oh God, what are they going to be here? Aside from arguably quarterback, and you do have your kind of program hope, if you will, in Dylan Rhule.
And at least the way I look at it, it's a really good spot for him. And we talked about the offensive line. We feel pretty good about. We think the pass catchers massively upgraded. We think the run game and the running back room going to be in a really good spot. This is an ideal situation for Dylan Rhule to come in and play for. You go back 12 months and say you wouldn't want a true freshman playing in that offense behind a leaky offensive line with a running back room that's depleted, a pass catcher room that has a bunch of true freshmen playing. This is, at least in my mind, a really good spot for Dylan Rhule to have year one success. And the upside, again, it's certainly there with Dylan Rhule. There's a reason he was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. You're kind of right. It's unfair to rank him. We have him at number 7, dead last, but that's not necessarily indicative of how we feel about this quarterback room. Bill, that'll do it. Nebraska fans, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section, some of your feedback. We appreciate you guys more than you know for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.